Well, Fran, thank you so much for coming on the In L&D podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. Great to be here.
Would you mind kicking us off by completing that sentence, please? In L&D.
In L&D, being realistic helps us to do our best work.
Nice. Realism. One of the things I was thinking when we spoke the first time is you're the perfect person in my eyes to have this conversation with because of your background in your career. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your journey in L&D and then how that's led you to this belief around realism.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out not in L&D, which I find pretty much everyone I talk to that's in L&D, no one woke up one day and said, you know what, I'm going to go into learning and development. I did that classic path, did an English degree. Everyone tells you to be a teacher. You fall into another job as a stopgap because you really don't want to be a teacher. And then ironically, a few years later, you land on L&D, which kind of is like being a teacher, isn't it? But just with a bit more nuance. Yeah, that's how I got there. And I've been in L&D for about 12 years now across charity sector.
Yeah. And the charity sector is kind of why I thought was such an interesting idea around realism, because I imagine that there are a lot of challenges, constraints, maybe unique things that other people won't see. And we're going to get into a lot of that now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess the key one of starting there is, when we spoke the first time, you told me that you'd co-created and worked with a lot of volunteers. And a challenge I've heard a lot of L&D people talk about is understanding how much time or energy someone really has to devote to creating something or being an SME inside a business. And as someone who's worked with volunteers a lot, where there's probably different challenges around resources, what are some of those differences between employees and volunteers and kind of how you've approached this?
Yeah, this is a massive, massive thing, and it's such a good question. I'm so pleased you asked. I started out as a volunteer learning and development lead, and it's only within the last kind of 18 months, 2 years that I've started doing more around colleague learning. And part of that was a self-belief that they're not such transferable skills as you'd think. And I'd kind of stopped myself ever going towards colleagues. I was like, oh, it's such a different environment. But what I hadn't quite pinned down was what that different situation was and what that different circumstances would be. So I think in learning and development, we often really overestimate people's willingness and availability. I've really learned that the hard way over the years. So as I say, started out with volunteers, worked with them all the time. And as you mentioned, Gary, it really does come with its own challenges. I was under the impression, and I think there is this perception, and feel free, I'd love if someone from another charity listens to this and they say, no, I completely disagree with Fran on this one. I'd love to hear it. But I was always under the impression that it would be really hard to get volunteers to engage, particularly when it comes to co-design and co-creation, having the capacity to input into something, essentially. And actually what I found was it was completely the opposite. So the people who step forward to be involved in these things, the people that really want to help shape what their development looks like, they're really keen. And it kind of goes back to that phrase, like, always ask a busy person. Because what I found was when I started working with colleagues a lot more, I was really surprised in that shift in dynamic. I thought, well, these people are paid to be here. They're gonna absolutely want to give their time to shape what development looks like for them and for everyone else. And actually, the motivation is really different. So, unfortunately, it means that the engagement people are willing and even able to give as employees often is less than volunteers, and it's not through want of trying. It's just that capacity. And so you really do need to ensure that when you're bringing employees into the mix, when you're asking them to be involved as stakeholders, you have to really kind of speak to them. Why does it matter to me? And you have to have that question answered before anyone will invest that effort. I think we talk about co-creation a lot, and that's great. And I love it. I think my job would be utterly useless if I didn't get the end user involved, if I'm completely honest. But it has become a bit of a buzzword over time, and sometimes it can really mask how much invisible labour is needed from the people that you're working with, and you really need to be upfront about that moving forward. And that's all around kind of building a relationship with those people that you're involving right from the start. That's absolutely essential, and just having a really open and frank conversation about it.
Yeah, I think it's that with volunteers, I guess they already have a clear why, because otherwise they wouldn't have come to volunteer. But I guess it's equally easy for an employee to have a why not, because if you're not upfront about how much effort is required to do this thing the first time, then next time that's an easy why not, isn't it? So what you probably do really have to nail is about being realistic about what's needed from that person if you're going to have any sort of short-term or long-term success with them, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. And what else I find quite interesting, I mean, this is very specific to a larger charity or a larger organisation with volunteers, is if you don't necessarily do things in the best way possible, and someone thinks, you know what, I was involved in this and it wasn't a great experience, they're probably not going to go and tell every other person that volunteers with you. They might. It's always a risk, and there is always that balance around kind of reputational risk. If that happens internally with your employees, who you've already kind of struggled to get them on board, if it doesn't work well and they think, well, actually, I don't know why I was involved in that, my feedback hasn't been taken on board, it was a huge drain on my time and capacity, they will absolutely kind of have those coffee catch-ups with people and say, you know what, I really wouldn't recommend getting involved because my feedback isn't worth anything to the L&D team. And so you have to be really clear around not only that relationship building and that stakeholder management at the beginning, but also what the expectations are. And if you are involving people in something, be clear about why and what you will do with that information afterwards.
Yeah. How have you approached that now that you're working more with colleagues, when you want to get them on board at the start and ensure that you get off on the right foot and you're not misleading them in terms of how much time is required? What have you kind of done there to safeguard against that?
I've tried to build it in right at the beginning with kind of those performance consulting questions. So, I mean, everyone finds that requests come in a bit differently. But for us, like if a learning intervention has been requested, I'm quite open and say, actually, you've asked for this. How much time do you have to give to this? Because I think there's often this perception that I'm going to come to learning and development, I'm going to come to the talent team, and we're going to be able to do something with that information straight away. They're going to run with it. I've passed the pen. They've received it, and I don't need to do anything about it anymore. And actually, you have to be really upfront about that. Yeah.
And that's, I guess, better received. And people are probably more honest if they get asked the honest question about how much time do you really have to realistically dedicate to this. Thinking about the time or energy people have for learning, when we spoke last time, we also spoke about the attention economy and this narrative that people have never been more distracted or more time poor, and that maybe this is getting oversimplified when we talk about it in L&D terms. So what are your thoughts on that issue around the attention economy?
So I think about this on a really regular basis. Every time I pick up my phone, which is more
Yeah.
often than I care to admit, I think, oh, how does this apply to L&D? And I think, to be honest, what I'm about to say might be quite controversial, because I don't know if it goes against what quite a lot of other people are saying. I don't think people have shorter attention spans. That's what we're hearing a lot. People have shorter attention spans. You need to get stuff to them quicker. I don't think that's necessarily true. I just think they're being far more selective about what they can give their attention to. And I actually read something about this recently, and it shared that the human brain operates at an information processing capacity of about 120 bits per second. And so that just means that you can't possibly process all of the data that you're getting on a day-to-day basis. I mean, you think about, you walk down the street, then when there's televisions and windows and you've got your phone on you all the time. I think what that means is, from a learning and development perspective, we now need to start designing for that cognitive load, not just content volume, because people will be far more selective about what they're willing to give their time and energy to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm seeing this a lot in like a marketing and content space, is the shift back to long form. So I think people have got this kind of scroll fatigue, and there were some things I saw around especially from an educational perspective, if someone scrolled for an hour and they asked them if they remembered any of the reels that they watched, it would be a no. If someone
Yeah.
watched maybe equivalent amount of time on YouTube, for example, longer form, they were more likely to remember some of that because it's probably more nuanced around one topic and it's goes across. There's like a narrative
Yeah.
arc to it as opposed to like dopamine, dopamine, dopamine of scrolling. I think you said to me that you thought it was built for engagement and not understanding a lot of the time social, and that might be something to
Yeah.
consider in L&D, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we think about social media, when we think about TikTok and Instagram, you're getting those quick hits of content that make you feel something. It's exactly what you just described there, Gary. It's that dopamine hit. You're like, yep, I've seen that video of the dog. It's made me laugh. Brilliant. I'm going to move
Yeah.
on now. It's not really designed for you to stop, reflect, and apply anything. That's the bit that learning really needs. So when you think about it, you've got to think, well, okay, we know that people do seem to be engaging with this quick short form content. How can we then harness that human need for the dopamine hit and then use that for learning?
Mm.
But what you've just said is exactly true. It's designed for engagement, it's not designed for understanding. So we really need to take inspiration from those platforms designed to keep people scrolling, to keep them engaged, but then we need to scaffold that with the other things that can sit
Mm.
around it to enable a lot more in terms of reinforcement or, okay, you've just watched this really engaging video. Now what?
Yeah.
What are you going to do with that?
Mm. What are some of those ways we could scaffold that? Because I completely see how that would work. Even if you took the TikTok principle to its full conclusion and you had loads of shorts about a subject, maybe, and but then it would be okay. Well, now what are you going to do with that? So what are some of the things people could do to support that actually being retained or used or applied?
So we're trialing something at the moment where we are using some short form videos from TikTok actually,
Mm.
which are relevant to the content that we're sharing, and we are asking people to pause and reflect. So it's keeping that really kind of quick fire information, and then how does this apply to you, rather than moving straight on. So that's something that we are actively trying at the moment. Because that learning transfer, it doesn't just live in the learning, it lives in the what happens afterwards.
Mm.
Quite often that's actually the manager's territory. So you can build the best program in the world, and if the line manager doesn't reinforce it or reference it or believe in it, that's when it's going to fall down. Um, so I think in that regard, that's where we need to be quite sensible and realistic
Mm.
again,
Yeah.
in that sometimes we can't own that transfer as a L&D perspective. We can put everything in place. We can make sure managers have what they need to have conversations about these videos, the short form content that people are receiving, enabling them to have those conversations, bring them into one-to-ones in their day-to-day working, referencing it on a really regular basis. But we just need to, I've lost my train of thought a little bit.
No, no, I get it. Well, that's realism. It's like you say, underpinning it with realism. There's realism
Yeah,
about where does this format actually apply and what we can do.
yeah,
It's not a silver bullet. There has to be realism about what it is and isn't used for, and there has to be realism about who owns what parts of the process. And actually, if someone is better placed to make sure this is uh, there's recall of this thing, it's applied, it's tested after the learning happens, then it's
mm,
realistic about how do we enable that person to then go and be the champion of that, as opposed to just thinking, well, this is short form, it's engaged them now. Of course, it's going to kind of stick with them and they go on and use it.
yeah. I think that's it. And you've just said something. It's triggered a thought in my head around how a few years ago, learning technologies, everything was short form content.
Yeah.
And it was like, great, we can break down all of this really detailed training into these short bite-sized videos. And I can almost guarantee that none of that learning will have landed,
Mm,
because what we need is that spaced repetition, that
yeah.
opportunity to have brief touch points, those regular things that make it a learning journey,
Yeah.
that process. So when we think about good evaluation, that's going to be normally you would check in if you're looking to create a behavior change, you're going to check in a few months down the line and say, okay, how has this worked? Why don't we do the same thing with the content that we've just given
Mm,
you?
yeah.
Okay, how did you use that content?
Yeah. I mean, without plugging in rehearsal, but this is something we our team do really well for our customers. They have these resources that are about when you can use this in the most effective moment. It's not just about access to content. So we have like these manager moment cheat sheets where if you are tackling a particular subject or topic or challenge, these are the resources that will be useful to you in that moment. Or if you as a team need to discuss something, here's a guide on how you can take a piece of content and then go and use it to have a constructive discussion around it. And what I found interesting speaking to some customers about that is how useful that is in terms of allowing other people to own parts of the process, but
Yeah.
still use the content that they want them to use. So I completely agree that it's like having seen that firsthand, it is not just about having the access, but it's what are you going to use it for and when are you going to use it and how are you going to understand how it's
Yeah.
used.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Sometimes it works really well if it's reinforcing something that people have already learned. So if you've maybe had a workshop or something, you can do it in that bit of a flipped approach. So you do some pre-work, you do the workshop, and then maybe there's something else that follows after in a bite-sized touch point
Yeah.
just to
Yeah.
reinforce that and help it land rather than
Yeah.
introducing something brand new.
When we spoke before as well, you also mentioned that we're often scared to admit that we shouldn't be doing the thing in the first place. And as someone who often finds myself really deep into something and then asking myself, why am I doing this? What was the purpose of this? What impact is it going to have? That really resonated with me. So, thinking about being realistic in your role with the limited scope you have, how do we end up in this position and what can we do about it of doing the thing and not being admitting that we shouldn't be
Yeah.
doing
Yeah, you know what? I'm always scared to admit that that's something I think we're scared to admit. It's all a
it?
bit meta. Um, I- you know what? I think it stems back to something that I've heard a lot in my time in learning and development, and that is this story that whenever budgets are stretched, whenever changes have to be made, and we are living in a time where there are a lot of structural changes happening in organizations, generally it's the development team that's the first to go. Now, I actually don't know how true that is, if I'm
Mm.
honest, but it's been said so often that I think it gives us the fear. And what the result of that is that there's that real pressure to be seen as adding value, because if we can't
Mm.
be seen as adding value, there is that question around, okay, well, what are they here for? What's the point? Um, and then there is a question around, okay, but what is value?
Yeah.
And I think when you look at an organization and you said, okay, what is a value as far as learning and development is concerned, you could talk to five different people, probably even within the learning and development teams, if I'm completely honest with you.
Yeah.
But you could speak to five different people across different levels, across different teams in the organization, and no one can really tell you what the value is, which is
Mm.
it's a terrible thing to admit, isn't it? But I think that that links directly to that idea of being order takers versus performance consultants.
Mm.
And when I was thinking about this before the session today, I thought loads of listeners will really relate to that order takers versus performance consultants. And I even had a call with someone this morning where it just really affirmed it to me. You know,
Yeah.
someone had come to me and they said, "Oh, can you create some videos on this thing?" It's like, I'm not sure why. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's unpack. Um, and as a result, like, I've really had to learn to pause and ask, is this something I should solve, or is it something that I've been asked to solve? Or
Mm.
not, sometimes it's not even, is it something I've been asked to solve? It's, is this something that people have said that they might like? It might be quite nice to have.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of, in those situations, I guess you just have to dig into it, don't you, and try and work out what the problem actually is and why is someone here asking me for it, what
Yeah.
motivation have they had to get to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it. The question isn't, can we do this? It's the question is, if we do it and it works, what changes?
Mm.
What is the purpose of this? And I think that's where sometimes that misalignment between the understanding of what the learning and development team is, are,
Yeah.
um, versus what, yeah, what people think you are versus what you should be,
Yeah.
and actually what the organization needs. And so
Yeah.
you do have to sometimes challenge that and say, well, actually, we are here to help enable behavior change, to enable development. And if you can't answer that clearly, it's really worth pausing.
Yeah. Yeah, that what changes thing, if we do this, is probably the easiest question to work out whether it's worth your time or not, isn't it? Because if it's
Yeah.
just this might happen versus if someone comes to you with something and oh, this will definitely contribute to solving this problem? Because I think
Hmm.
that's a position I find myself in a lot as well. Is this might do something, maybe this thing is
Yeah.
most likely to do something, so something will change if I do this. That's a little bit more wishy-washy. Maybe that's not worth my time, that piece there.
Yeah, 100%. And that's where you need to start asking those performance consultancy
Mm,
questions, because that's when you really start unpacking it and really get into the crux of, okay, what is it that people are looking for?
mm,
Because I've definitely found there has been times where we say, oh, well, actually, there's not a knowledge gap here. This isn't a development need. There's
yeah,
something else at play, like there's workload, there's a lack of clarity, maybe there's a leadership situation, and no amount of learning was going to fix that. But then there's that other point at play, that other question. Okay, well, I've now identified that there are these things that need changing. We do need to review that workload is too much, or leadership isn't quite framing this in the right way. How do you then get into those right conversations to make recommendations?
mm,
And that kind of goes full circle back to the conversation we were having at the start around that
yeah,
stakeholder and relationship building.
yeah. I think someone said to me recently about that just the mindset of it's not going to happen overnight. You're
Yeah.
suddenly not going to be in all the right conversations if you can make small steps towards. So I think that's sometimes the thing, isn't it? You think that you're not making progress towards being more consultative, but if you're involved in one extra meeting in this project, for example, and then the next time you're in a little bit earlier, I think
Mm.
that's a lesson I've heard from a few people.
I think that's really worthwhile. And I think sometimes we are terrible for it, particularly in learning and development. We don't take the time to stop for ourselves and
Yeah.
develop ourselves because we're so busy developing other people. Um, and sometimes you do just need to pause, slow down, and think, okay, where was I 6 months ago? And that's helped me
Mm,
quite a lot with some of the things that I've been doing at work at the moment, where I thought, oh gosh, this has been really challenging. I really thought I'd be further along by now. And if I'd built this relationship or this relationship, and
mm,
you just have to take that opportunity to say, okay, well, now I've reflected on this. 6 months ago, we were in a very different position.
yeah.
And I have managed to get into those spaces and I have taken this as a development opportunity and I have learned. And so you do just need to take that pause. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right.
It's funny enough, I don't normally record two episodes of this in one day, but I recorded one earlier, and verbatim, someone said to me that his boss said, "You have to slow down."
Yeah.
On my work day. We were saying before we started recording that often it's validating to hear that other people are having the same problem. So now I've heard it twice in one day that actually slowing down will help you have a bit
Yeah.
more perspective about what you're working on. Should you be working on it? How far have you come? So
Yeah,
maybe that's
absolutely.
a lesson for me as well.
And and by doing that as well, that's when learning and development does start becoming a bit more of that change management discipline.
Yeah.
Not just that training delivery function, not just the people that churn out videos that might make some change. Um, I think something that I have found quite challenging and it's worth acknowledging is that's a bit of a shift to how things have worked before.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes that gets a bit of pushback because people think, oh, hang on a minute. I used to come to you and stuff used to get done at the click of my fingers, and it's not about doing less. I think that's the one thing to really emphasize.
Mm.
It's not about doing less at all. It's just about making sure that the effort that people are putting in within an organization, it's really directed at something that's going to move the needle and really make change.
Mm. You're right there. We have come full circle because that is exactly what we said about the working with colleagues at the start, isn't
Yeah.
it? Being realistic about how much can you invest and what impact is actually going to have, which I think leads us nicely to this tension between building on what we just spoke about now.
Mm,
What could I do versus what should I do? And often that comes down to the context of the business you work in, doesn't it? And the environment and the people. So how do you navigate that challenge around this is the context of the business I work in, and therefore what is worth my time?
yeah, definitely. And that context piece is so, so important. And I was just thinking about when you and I had our initial meeting, Gary, and I was saying, you know what, sometimes I think that this is what led us to the title of this session, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I said sometimes we create things and we know that it's not what it should be
Mm,
because you're navigating the politics of the organization, you're navigating that and understanding the environment that you're working within. And you know that actually, in the best possible situation, you'd really slow down, you'd do
yeah,
a proper 5 DIs approach, and you'd really map everything out, and it would be hugely effective. Um, Sometimes you just have to bow down and
Yeah.
say, actually, I recognize that this is what people are asking for, and I have navigated as much as I can in terms of the organizational context. I've tried to identify, we've had those performance consultancy conversations, we've
Mm.
identified where we think this should be and what it should look like. And sometimes the organization isn't ready yet, or the power dynamics aren't right, or the culture's not right. And so you just have to you adjust your approach a little
Yeah.
bit, just approach it a bit differently. And that's a skill that we don't talk about very much in learning and development, but I think that's when it starts to separate those effective practitioners from frustrated ones.
Yeah.
You know, you might know this is the right way to design something. This is what's going to really have the best impact.
Mm.
But if the business isn't ready for it or stakeholders aren't aligned, if you then push it too hard, it's going to slow things down.
Yeah.
And some, again, as well, you can learn from that situation, but also then the organization can learn from it as well. And you can say, well, you know what, we tried it this time. Maybe next time we could take this other approach. Maybe we'll have shifted the dial slightly further and we'll be in a position where we can do this absolutely gold standard solution.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
sometimes, like thinking about that, sorry, Gary,
There
sometimes the right solution in 18 months' time might just need a bit of a smaller proof of concept now.
Mm.
And that's how you get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is the challenge. It's hard because you want to bring your best work, and but often the best work you can do within a context comes with limitations on the full scope of what you could do. So, maybe
Mm,
you want to, normally best practice is to interview 10 stakeholders before you kick off a project. But in this instance, it needs to start tomorrow, and maybe we can interview three. But that is the best practice in this context. Is that so it's hard to, you don't want to compromise when maybe you could do something more effective if you have more time. But the realism is, with the context of what we're doing, this is the best thing for this context, and it's better than trying to do the full thing and it failing, or doing nothing and it failing. And then like you say, you can learn from that and
yeah.
say, look, this did work to an extent, but actually, if next time we have more time to do this, this, and this, then we will see a better result.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's taking that learning from it, isn't it? I think no, that's something that no one's ever going to want to admit either.
Yeah,
It's probably a dangerous thing for me to admit on a podcast.
yeah.
But I mean, we just have to be realistic again about, understanding that organizational context. That isn't lowering your standards. It's just about protecting the quality of your work and making sure that the right thing gets implemented at the right time. And ultimately, you cannot lead change if you don't understand that system that you're working in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is a hard. Like, I think that's the same for every role. Actually, I'm just thinking about a few people I know who
Mm.
work in kind of tech or um, events planning. I think it's just reminding me that all those people are probably going through the exact same challenge of,
Yeah.
I just have to understand the system and do my best work within it. And done is better than perfect sometimes, not
Yeah.
always. But yeah,
Yeah. Sadly.
yeah, yeah. You spoke a little bit about it earlier about value and understanding what that looks like as well. And I think impact is another one that needs a bit of realism and a bit of
Mm.
contextualization when it comes to proving value. You mentioned it as quite abstract. Sometimes people don't actually have a shared definition of what value is. So I think it'd be great to hear some of your thoughts on impact with this mindset of what's realistic, what's contextual, what can we actually measure?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think when I was reflecting on this, I think it's one of the most uncomfortable conversations in learning and development, and that's because it kind of links back to what we were just talking about in terms of why are we doing things.
Mm.
We're all aware of impact and making sure we're evaluating. I'm not convinced everyone does it successfully. And what I mean by that is that we've defaulted to what's easy, those completion scores, satisfaction scores, post-course happy sheets.
Yeah.
That- That's not because it's wrong, but it's because the things that really, really matter are much harder to pin down.
Mm.
And it comes back to what we were saying about behavior change and performance shift. These things take time. And so a lot of people, we're measuring them, but actually organizations, when they're reporting on things, they want a number by next quarter. So
Yeah.
you'll have put a lot of energy in. Maybe you've done a program over the last 12 to 18 months, And we say, okay, right, what's the change? What change have we seen straight away? And sometimes actually the change that you're going to see won't happen for the next 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, you have to be realistic about what measurement means, and that's being honest about what you can and can't attribute to a learning intervention. Like it might be that I think about it sometimes as a set of dominoes. So
Yeah.
I might push one domino over, that's my job as learning and development, and I know that there's a domino a little bit further down the line that actually relies on a lot more in terms of policy updates and things like that.
Yeah.
My domino is going to push that down to the policy domino, but it still requires that policy domino to be pushed
Yeah.
because otherwise nothing's going to move. And then, so we really need to think early on about how do we know, what do we need to see to happen to know that something has worked.
Yeah.
And that's about designing the evaluation from the beginning and not retrofitting to measure at the end and allowing the time to do that.
Yeah. I think that dominoes one is so true because there'll be those, that concept of lead and lag indicators. Like the leading indicators are the things that you'll see quickly that show momentum towards something, and the lag ones are the ones that take longer. Like when someone explained that to me, it changed my mindset around these are some of the metrics we might see to indicate we're going on the right track towards that thing. But to expect it to go from there to there, that's hard to measure and it takes time. But you could say, well, actually, if, first of all, our first challenge is awareness. Well, if we can see metrics that show more people are aware of us, then it's easier to then say that more people are then going to engage with us or convert or interact with what we want them to do in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes as well in learning and development we don't own all the data either.
Yeah,
So we will be able to report on those happy sheets, but we might find it a bit harder to get the data around retention rates or demographic and drop off and things like that.
yeah,
I think that's why those initial conversations that you're having at the beginning with your stakeholders around, okay, what can we get access to? How often can we get access to? Who do I need to open that door to me
yeah,
to know? Because ultimately, I won't know if my thing has had impact without seeing that. Because sure, I can tell you that 12 people came to my training session yesterday, but I can't tell you necessarily what they did with that information
yeah,
other than that 6 month time check-in. What have you done with it? What we want is rather than someone kind of self-reflecting and saying, oh, I believe that I took this learning on board by doing X, Y, Z, we actually need to say, okay, what does that actually look like in
yeah,
practice rather than that level of self-awareness?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think, like you say, baking it in and designing the measurement or the evaluation around it. Because if, for example, if someone was from a customer success team and what we knew needed to happen off the back of whatever intervention was that they would get a better satisfaction score, resolution rate or something. And it would be easy to say, post this training, which the person attending was engaged in, we can see that their average close time or response time of a customer query was much faster. And I always try and think in those terms about like sales
Yeah.
and customer success are always the ones that make it easy for me to think, well, that's how we can bake it in because there's a clear, tangible outcome that we're trying to get to in that instance.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's something around being willing to say, we don't have enough evidence yet,
Mm,
or I can tell you this amount, but actually, let's talk to the team over there and we can really start adding a bit more shape and building that picture up a bit more.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that, to be fair, that is a hard thing to say, isn't it? When someone comes to you and, like you said, they want a
Mm,
number next week, it's maybe the default is to try and fudge it a little bit or just present what you do have. But actually, the honest, realistic, and most effective approach might be to say, I just don't know at this point, and I can try
yeah,
and find
yeah.
out. And there's a
And that
lot of
comes
things.
back to the question around value, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's tough. Something else that we wanted to talk about that needs a bit of dose of realism was AI and L&D. And I know this
Mm.
is every time I open LinkedIn, I see a sort of different take on this. So I would love to know, realistically, in your eyes, where should we be using it? Where do you use it? What's your take on what we shouldn't do with AI?
Yeah, yeah. I thought that I couldn't possibly go on a podcast without AI coming up. It is that hot topic, isn't it? There's a lot of noise around AI at the moment. Um, I don't know if I do use AI, possibly more than I care to admit, if I'm
Mm.
honest, in my day to day, in my personal life as well. Um, and I know there's a lot of um, there's a bit of hate towards it as well because we do know that environmentally it's not got a great impact.
Mm.
I think we need to think about it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. So that's something that we need to be really aware of. I think we need to be using it in the right place. If we're going to be adopting it in learning and development, we need to really think about, okay, where does it add value? I found speeding up content drafts, generating scenarios. I have the most terrible imagination. And so being able to feed Copilot a few kind of top line things and saying, hey, can you just turn this into something vaguely scenario-y,
Yeah.
obviously with a much better prompt than that,
Yeah, yeah.
you kind of get the kick a little bit further down.
Yeah.
It's really good at research synthesis, that repetitive production work. What it cannot do is replace the thinking. So we've talked a lot in this podcast around the value of stakeholder engagement, those relationships. AI won't be able to detect those relationships, those
Mm.
nuances. Maybe it won't pick up on that decision about whether you should be building something at all. And
Mm.
that's where it needs to still come down to us. I think there is a real risk. I mean, I've got numerous books on my shelves downstairs around bite-sized learning and social media and micro learning, gamification, and I think
Mm.
there is a real risk that we see this powerful tool in AI and we just assume that it's going to solve the problem without stopping to really think about what is that problem that we're trying to solve. Um, I think something that would be remiss of me to like not mention as well is we've talked a lot about how much content there is out there, how people have content overload all the time. The risk with AI is it makes it a lot easier to produce more content faster.
Yeah.
The issue's never been that there's a shortage of content.
No.
So I think the most realistic thing and the organizations that will get the most from AI in learning and development are those that are going to use it to enhance their judgment and kind of free up that time that's left to think, not the ones that are using it to skip thinking altogether.
Yeah.
I think it's a case of let's learn it, let's use it where it genuinely helps, but let's keep a critical lens on it and don't let the hype set your strategy for you.
Yeah. I mean, the point you made about unless you've defined what the problem is, there's no point trying to use a
Mm,
tool to speed up the process of getting to the wrong solution, is there? So the process of consultative questions and getting people involved at the right time and positioning yourself in the right way, those are all things that will just be like probably be more important if anything.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I've spoken to a lot of people that are working at organizations that are rolling out AI training, but actually they don't know what they're going to be using that AI product for yet. You think, well, what are you training people in?
That is a
What are
great.
you encouraging them to do? Because at the moment, all we are encouraging people to do is churn out more content,
Mm,
and that's where we're going to come unstuck.
yeah. I fully agree. And also, as a man who's constantly battling through noise around content
Yeah,
online, yeah, please stop if you are using AI to create marketing content. You're making my job
save my
hard.
job.
Yeah, make my job. Cool. I know we're close to time, so I just wanted to
Mm,
ask the kind of last question that when I remember, I've been asking people at the end.
okay.
I, my memory has failed me a couple of times, but I've been mostly asking people, what is something that you're still working on or that you haven't quite cracked yet?
Mm. What a tricky question. And as I said earlier, um, we don't normally invest in ourselves as much as we should.
Mm,
So, I mean, that is one thing that I am still working on is making the time
yeah.
to do it. I also think there is something around slowing down, kind of that kind of balancing that tension between moving
Mm,
fast enough to be relevant and slowing down enough to do things properly.
mm,
Um, and then it's just a case of that reminder as well. Being realistic isn't about lowering standards. And I think that is true whether you're thinking about yourself, your learners, your stakeholders, your measurement approach, or yourself. And I think that is something that I have to remind myself as well on a
Yeah,
regular
yeah,
basis. Hang on, you are just being realistic.
yeah. No, that is brilliant. That's a great note to end on as well, because I think it sums up perfectly what we spoke about. Um, it's about the context of what you're working in. What can you do in that, and maybe just being a little bit more kind to yourself and giving
Yeah,
yourself space to slow down and do your best work rather than just churn out content. So, Fran,
absolutely.
thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I will, if it's okay with you, put your LinkedIn profile in the description and whatnot in case anyone wants
Great.
to reach out after and connect. Other than that, thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, and thanks for reaching out.